Hello, and thank you very much for joining us for the Jumpstarting for Spelling training program with my colleague Sara Haboubi and me, Paula Monti. Now this is Module 1, Part 1, an introduction to the program. You're going to hear a little bit about Sara and me and a bit of history and background to the process. So whether you've already met us on our introductory video or this is our first encounter, welcome. We're so excited you're taking this course. Our job is to provide you with the skills you need to coach your child to overcome his or her spelling difficulties. This is all about you and your child achieving success together. You and your child will get to understand what's been preventing him or her from learning to spell and how to use your child's strengths to learn in a new way. It took Sara and me a long time to find the answer to the question, why is it that some really bright, talented children find it so hard to learn to spell? Well, since we found the answer, we've been transforming people's lives by helping them develop the skill for learning that they've been missing. For those of you who don't know us yet, Sara and I are learning coaches and trainers. My background is in education. I spent over 30 years in primary schools as a teacher and head teacher. I also taught adult literacy over that time. I loved teaching and wanted to stay at the chalk face, but towards the end of my career I was seconded by my school to the local authority and became a trainer developing and delivering leadership programs for school leaders. My main interest as a teacher was in developing literacy skills. As you can imagine, over my 30-year career I had experience of a really wide range of methods, strategies, programs, schemes, interventions and so forth. I remember back in the 1980s telling parents not to worry about their child's spelling. Well, we didn't want to focus on it as it might interrupt the creative flow. Well, luckily things have moved on. But although we have a more robust and systematic approach to the teaching of reading and spelling, still far too many children are struggling with these basic skills. Do you know, it hurt me as a teacher and as a head teacher to see bright children with loads of talents struggling to learn to read and spell. It was truly hard to have to tell parents that we were doing all we could, and even a diagnosis of dyslexia wouldn't fundamentally change what we could offer in terms of support. Well, we just didn't have the knowledge or skills necessary to help some children overcome their difficulties. Hard to admit, really. In fact, the limitations of the education system were recognised by Sir Jim Rose in his report on dyslexia in 2009, in which he says that many children with severe literacy difficulties may never reach expected levels, and the school needs to put in place support to maintain self-confidence and self-esteem, both of which can be lost so easily when learning is a problem. Not good enough for me. I was always looking for answers, often reaching out for more unconventional ways to tackle the question of why some children find reading and spelling such a challenge. Unfortunately, I retired 6 years ago without finding the answer. And, well, I was happily enjoying my retirement, lunching and dog walking, when, purely by chance, I met an inspirational lady called Olive Hickmott, and we'll tell you more about her in a moment. Well, I met Olive, and she shared her insights with me. I trained with her and then began to experiment with children in colleague schools. I was amazed at the results, so much so that I decided I just had to come out of retirement and spend, well, as much time as I've got left spreading the word about this amazing discovery. So now I'm a learning coach and trainer using the Jumpstarting process in my work. I have many students referred to me from the Dyslexia Research Trust. I have also trained staff in over 30 schools. I run courses at the Helen Arkell Dyslexia Centre. They're very supportive of our work. I've trained staff and volunteers from the Springboard charity. They're based in London and they provide support for children who are struggling at school with literacy. Now, from our work in schools recently, Sara and I know that schools and teachers are increasingly under pressure from all sides, all kinds of constraints, demands, expectations. Resources are spread so thinly. Your child, however, needs help now. Your child matters. Now, to introduce this groundbreaking process into schools, it's going to take us a considerable amount of time. Now, we're slowly making headway in both the UK and Ireland and around the world. And the reason we're offering this to parents is because we want to empower you with the information and tools to then be able to empower your own child and help them learn more effectively. We know that every day matters in a child's school career, and no child can afford to lose learning time waiting for this to finally become available to all students in all schools.
And I'm actually a mum myself. I have 2 boys and they're both at primary school here in Ireland. And exactly as Paula said, you can't afford to wait around losing any time really as children start to struggle. And both of my children struggled in their early primary years to spell. My older son was doing quite typically, I know of many students, letters and number reversals. And as time went on, it really wasn't improving. I kept being told he's going to grow out of it, it's fine, but it really didn't look as if that was going to be the case. And my younger son, when he started school, he really with the first 2 years really struggled in terms of spelling and reading abstract words, particularly those with irregular spelling, the ones you would know them as sight words or tricky words. So my background actually is originally as an engineer and a project manager, and I have the sort of brain that loves solving puzzles. In fact, the more difficult, really, the better. I know a lot of people think I'm a bit insane that way, but I do love puzzles. And in 2002, I actually changed careers from engineering, and I ended up going into personal and professional development. I became a coach and a trainer, and I've been working in that field ever since. My main interest, though, was always about learning. I was always fascinated by how is it we all learn so differently. How learning is essentially strategies. We all use different strategies for different outcomes and different subjects and in different ways, and how we can actually improve those strategies so that we can become better learners and in fact achieve more of our potential than we even thought possible. In 2004, I actually worked with the school completion programme, and for 6 years I worked with a local secondary school alongside this programme. Initially, I was brought in to help with things like exam stress and study skills and also some behavioural issues in class and things like that. But actually, as time went on, I was sent more and more students who were actually struggling with basic literacy and numeracy skills. And they got younger and younger, so I started off with final year students and actually ended up with first and second year students. And the interesting thing for me was that, in fact, when I delved into their educational psychological reports, what I found was that many of them had dyslexia and maybe other diagnoses as well, but predominantly dyslexia was the one that really stood out for me. And it seemed that my coaching skills could really only go so far with those students. I really didn't fully understand what dyslexia actually was. Although most of these students had been receiving learning support and resource in primary school, and some of them, not all, but many of them did continue to get support in secondary level, they were still falling further and further behind their peers. They didn't even really have some of the basic skills to be able to cope at secondary level. And they were getting more and more frustrated. Perhaps their timetable was being reduced, they might have been exempt from a second language, things like that. But essentially, for some of them, they had already given up. They believed they would never be able to learn or to be successful academically. Like I said, I love a challenge, and I always believe that when it comes to people, if there's a problem, there is always a solution. I needed to find out more about what dyslexia was, though, and what else was out there that could really help students overcome their learning challenges. And that's when I met Olive, quite independently from Paula, but roughly around about the same time. And I listened to a talk that she gave on empowering learning, the Jumpstarting process. And once I even knew that little bit about it just from her talk, I really couldn't wait to try it out at the school, and I saw immediate results. I really just couldn't believe it. After a while, I decided that I really need to do some research on this. So I went off and I did a Master's in Adult Learning and Development at NUI Galway. I believe that if an adult who has struggled all their life could overcome their learning difficulties with this process, then it would definitely work with the youngsters I'd been working with at the secondary school, that type of age range. But as time went on with the project, and I actually heard from the adults themselves who struggled right the way from primary school, I realised that actually the best place for this would be at primary level. It would be with the students right from the start, age 4 or 5, right from the minute any sort of difficulty starts to show up. Don't wait. Start to address it immediately if you've got the tools. I was really lucky. In 2013, I met an amazing principal of a primary school, fantastic school, and he offered me, his staff, to pilot this. They said, okay, let's have a look and see, can it work across a whole school? But not just in terms of as an intervention, actually in mainstream classes. So every single class was introducing their students to this process. All the students were taught how to do it. And actually, if you want to see the results of what happened at that school, there's a few interviews, there's a few links underneath this where you can see I interviewed Shay directly and asked him about what were the results at the school. There's also an interview with us on TV, and I have a couple of radio interviews where I talk about this. And since meeting Olive, I've worked with hundreds of students and their families. I've trained staff in 20 primary schools across Ireland, and I've also presented on the Jumpstarting process at conferences in the UK and actually Australia as well, because this is really starting to get some serious interest from educators around the world. So I'd like to introduce Olive. Here she is, Olive Hickmott, this amazing woman who invented the process. She had showed signs of dyslexia most of her life. She struggled with reading and spelling pretty much all the way through school. Luckily, she was great at maths though, and she went on to do a maths degree and have a very successful career as an engineer. It wasn't until she left the corporate world, though, did she actually start to investigate what could be done about learning difficulties. This became her passion and her life's mission. Now, one of the things you're going to find out more about on this course is that so many people with dyslexia actually have amazing strengths and talents. They have this uncanny ability to think outside the box, to be really creative, to see things very, very differently. And Olive is definitely one of those people. Actually, she's a genius, really. I don't think there's another way of putting that. She was able to see dyslexia in a totally different light. As a result, could see a very different approach and therefore a different solution to those that are traditionally offered either at school or privately. So for any of you who have taken your children to have assessments or have gone to private tutors, this is going to be very different from any of those. In fact, this comes from such a radically different perspective, which we'll explain to you in part 2. Once this is understood, you will never see learning difficulties in the same light again.
So Olive's insights helped to explain to me what was missing in all the programs and schemes, etc., that I had used in my 30-year career. It explained to me why neither phonics nor the look and say approaches were working for all children. So let's just clarify what we mean by phonics and look and say. Well, in a phonics approach, we can look at our dog on the left there, you work from the sound of the spoken word, or such as dog. You break the sound of the word down to its smallest parts, d, o, g, and then you blend the sounds together. The look and say, which is represented on the other side there, with our dog there, is how children will learn what Sara referred to as the high frequency words, the tricky words, the words that can't be sounded out, such as the, once, who, etc. And with this method, the children are expected to look at the word and to memorize and then be able to recall the whole word when they're reading and spelling. So really, although phonics is the predominant system that we're using in schools at the moment, we do still need to use the look and say for the sight words. And as a teacher, you'd use all kinds of interesting, motivating exercises, songs, games, all different ways to help the children learn. And most teachers will send word lists home for the children to practice and learn. And for some children, well, for most children really, around sort of 85%, these methods work. And after certainly a couple of years, you suddenly see the children taking off with their reading. They become fluent readers, confident spellers, and we say, well, they've got it. And it's really thrilling. It's a wonderful thing to see. But for other children, despite all the best efforts of the teachers, the children themselves, their parents, including additional help, perhaps within class, being taken out of class, they just don't get it. They continue to struggle, often throughout their whole school career and lives. Now, Olive has discovered the reason why this 20% are not learning, and it's to do with the ability to store and retrieve the mental image of the word. because even if you're using phonics, at the end you actually need to be able to see the word, to have an image of it in your mind's eye. And this ability has actually been well known as the main skill necessary for fluent reading and proficient spelling. But Olive's genius is in finding a way to teach this skill explicitly. Well, up to now, or up to Olive, this was previously believed to be impossible. You were either born with the ability to visualize words or not. And we'll be explaining in more detail all about this as we go through the course.
So what can you expect from this program? Well, if you're watching this, then we can safely say that either you have a child or more than one child who is within that 20%, who it's just not working for in the classroom. Or you might be a teacher who is noticing the 20% who are struggling despite your best effort, their parents' best effort, the child, cannot really put any more effort into this and it's still not working. You might be a principal or a head teacher who, having realised that phonics programs are not working for your students, are now looking for something else that you can add into the toolbox for you and your staff that can actually make a difference for those students. And by the way, that really is one of the key points of this, is that we're not saying to throw anything out. In fact, this program is so brilliant because of its ability to be complementary to whatever else is actually being used. You may even have struggled yourself and you just want to find a way to overcome your own challenges with spelling and reading. So whatever your motivation for doing this course, what you can expect is information that will help you understand how all different brains process information differently. You're going to be given tools and strategies that will help you to become your child's best learning coach. You and your child are going to go on a journey of discovery that will allow you both to understand how your child can develop a new way of learning that works quickly, effectively, and believe it or not, it's actually fun. Children, whenever they know how to do this, they love it. They want to keep doing it. And, they never go back to the old way of learning because they can see that this works and they know it works. Our ultimate aim is to help relieve the stress and the strain that learning difficulties put on not only the child, but also the family as a whole. The sooner your child acquires this missing link, the sooner they can begin to regain self-confidence and even create a love of learning, something that will carry them through for the rest of their lives. So here's a quick overview of what's going to happen. Module 1, which this is the end of part 1. This has been our introduction about ourselves, a little bit about the origin of the jumpstarting process and what makes it so different. And part 2, which you're going to go on to shortly, is all about, does your child really have a difficulty in learning, or is it just a difference in learning and what you can do about it? We're going to look in part 3 about how good spellers spell. Remember I talked that learning is all about strategies, and spelling is a strategy, and we know how people who do it well, what they're doing. 4 is we're going to look at the impact of stress on learning, and 5, it's developing and controlling mental imagery. Then we'll move on to module 2, which is the jump-starting process itself for spelling. So we're ready to go to part 2. You're going to find out, you're going to be asked some questions and asking yourself some questions about your child. Have they really got a difficulty with learning? We're going to look at how we can move from weaknesses to strengths. This is all about changing the perspective. We're going to have a word about neurodiversity and what that means about your child. So we'll see you in the next part.